August 1970, a warm Saturday night. The traffic light turns green, and a brand new Chevelle SS 454 launches like it's been fired from a cannon. The rear tires erupt into smoke. The nose climbs high into the air. For a split second, the driver feels unstoppable. Then the car steps sideways. Another correction, another burst of throttle. And suddenly, nearly 4,000 pounds of American steel are sliding across the pavement. This wasn't a race car. It wasn't a prototype. It wasn't built for professional drivers. It was something anyone with enough money could buy from a Chevrolet dealership. But what almost nobody knows is that this terrifying machine wasn't born because Chevrolet wanted to build the world's deadliest muscle car. It was the result of one engineering decision, a decision made in the middle of America's horsepower war, a decision that gave drivers more power than the technology of the day could safely control. And what happened next changed everything. Most people think the story of the LS6 454 is simply about big horsepower, bigger carburetors, louder exhausts, bigger burnouts, but that's only the surface. The real story is about engineers chasing numbers so aggressively that they accidentally built an engine capable of overwhelming almost everything connected to it. Not just the tires, the clutch, the transmission, the rear axle, and sometimes even the driver. To understand why, you have to go back to the late 1960s, when Detroit was fighting a war unlike anything it had ever seen. Every major American manufacturer wanted one thing: bragging rights. Pontiac had shocked the industry with the GTO. Chrysler unleashed the legendary 426 Hemi. Ford answered with the Cobra Jet and Boss engines. Every year, horsepower climbed higher. Every advertisement promised more speed. Every dealership wanted the quickest car in town. Chevrolet had plenty of fast machines, but inside General Motors there was a problem. Corporate executives had quietly limited engine sizes in many intermediate cars, worried about insurance costs, public perception, and government scrutiny. Yet customers wanted bigger engines than ever before. Engineers knew exactly what buyers were asking for: more cubic inches, more torque, more speed. The pressure inside Chevrolet engineering kept growing. Then came one decision that changed muscle car history forever. Instead of squeezing more power from the existing 396 cubic inch big block, Chevrolet engineers decided to go bigger, much bigger. They enlarged the Mark IV big block architecture to an astonishing 454 cubic inches. That meant increasing the bore to 4.251 inches while keeping the familiar 4.00-inch stroke. The result was a massive 7.4-liter V8 that inhaled air and fuel with incredible efficiency. On paper, it sounded like the perfect answer. In reality, it created an entirely different kind of monster. The Mark IV big block was already famous for its rugged construction: thick cast iron block, deep skirt design, large main bearing caps, massive cylinder walls. It had originally been developed with high-performance applications in mind, capable of surviving sustained punishment that would have destroyed many smaller engines. Now imagine feeding that block another 58 cubic inches. Suddenly, every piston became larger, every combustion event became more violent, every press of the throttle delivered an avalanche of torque. And engineers loved it, because torque won races. But there was a problem. Horsepower often grabs headlines. Torque changes physics. Horsepower tells you how fast an engine can keep working. Torque is the twisting force that launches thousands of pounds of steel from a standstill. The new 454 didn't simply make impressive horsepower. Officially, Chevrolet rated the LS6 at 450 horsepower and a staggering 500 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers were measured using the generous gross rating system of the era, without accessories restricting output. Many historians and engine builders now believe the real gross horsepower was significantly higher, with some estimates reaching well beyond 500 horsepower under ideal conditions. Whether that number was 450 or over 500 hardly mattered. The feeling behind the wheel was unforgettable. Touch the throttle at low RPM and the engine didn't hesitate. It shoved violently. Magazine testers quickly noticed something unusual. Unlike smaller high-revving engines that needed thousands of RPM before coming alive, the LS6 delivered crushing torque almost everywhere. It didn't ask permission, it simply moved. That character came from careful engineering. Chevrolet equipped the LS6 with forged aluminum pistons capable of surviving its high 11.25-1 compression ratio. A forged steel crankshaft handled enormous cylinder pressures. Heavy-duty forged connecting rods kept everything together under brutal acceleration. High-flow rectangular port cylinder heads allowed massive volumes of air into the combustion chambers, while an aggressive solid lifter camshaft kept the valves open longer, helping the engine breathe at higher RPM. Feeding it all was a Holley 800 CFM 4-barrel carburetor sitting atop a high-rise aluminum intake manifold. At full throttle, the engine consumed fuel at an astonishing rate, but in return, it produced a wall of acceleration few production cars could match. Most people don't realize how extreme those components were for a street car in 1970. This wasn't just a comfortable cruiser with a larger engine. It was a race engine that happened to wear license plates, and Chevrolet was about to install it into the Chevelle SS. That decision would earn the LS6 legendary status, but it would also give birth to one of the most feared reputations in muscle car history, because once ordinary drivers got behind the wheel, the real nightmare was only beginning. The first-time owners buried the throttle in an LS6-powered Chevelle. Many of them made the same mistake. They expected a fast car. What they got was an explosion. The rear suspension squatted hard, the front end lifted. The Holley carburetor's secondary snapped open with a deep mechanical roar, and all 454 cubic inches answered at once. There was no gradual buildup, no gentle transition into power. The engine hit with such overwhelming torque that the rear tires often surrendered long before the crankshaft reached its peak horsepower. That's when Chevrolet's engineering decision revealed its unintended consequence. The LS6 wasn't too powerful for its engine components. It was too powerful for almost everything around it. The Chevelle SS weighed roughly 3,700 pounds depending on options, but it still rode on relatively narrow bias-ply tires by modern standards. Even the optional F60-15 wide oval tires simply couldn't generate enough grip to handle 500 pound-feet of torque on ordinary pavement. Flooring the accelerator from a stop usually meant one thing: smoke, lots of it. Road testers from the era repeatedly described the car as difficult to launch consistently. Magazine drivers struggled to find enough traction to record clean quarter-mile passes because the tires spun violently through first gear and sometimes into second. The engine wasn't running out of power, the pavement was running out of grip, but there was another problem. Chevrolet engineers had created an engine that produced enormous torque below 4,000 revolutions per minute. That sounds like a good thing, and for drag racing it absolutely was. But on public roads, it meant even a careless stab of the throttle while exiting a corner could instantly upset the entire chassis. There were no traction control computers, no electronic stability systems, no launch control, no anti-lock brakes. The only thing standing between all that torque and disaster was the driver's right foot. And sometimes, that wasn't enough. The LS6 itself was a masterpiece of brute force engineering. The Mark IV block featured 4-bolt main bearing caps to prevent crankshaft movement under extreme loads. Those forged connecting rods were shot-peened for added durability, while the forged crankshaft shrugged off punishment that would have twisted lesser components into scrap metal. At 6,500 revolutions per minute, the reciprocating assembly endured tremendous stress, yet the bottom end remained remarkably reliable. Chevrolet engineers knew racers would abuse this engine, so they overbuilt it wherever possible. Even the lubrication system reflected that philosophy. A high-capacity oil pump fed critical bearings continuously, reducing the chance of oil starvation during hard acceleration. Windage trays helped keep oil away from the spinning crankshaft, minimizing parasitic drag and maintaining more consistent oil pressure at sustained high RPM. It wasn't revolutionary. It was simply smart engineering. Most people don't realize the LS6 rarely failed because of weak internals. Something else usually broke first. Owners quickly discovered that dumping the clutch at high RPM could shatter U-joints, twist drive shafts, or destroy differential gears. Even the legendary M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed manual, already one of the toughest transmissions General Motors offered, earned its reputation because weaker gearboxes simply couldn't survive behind engines like the LS6. Mechanics began seeing familiar damage. Clutch discs burned black, axle shafts twisted, ring and pinion gears chipped teeth. Rear leaf springs wrapped under acceleration, causing violent wheel hop that multiplied stress throughout the driveline. Ironically, the engine itself often emerged completely unharmed. As one Chevrolet performance mechanic reportedly joked years later, the motor wasn't trying to kill itself, it was trying to kill everything attached to it. And then the racing world took notice. At dragstrips across America, LS6-powered Chevelles immediately became serious contenders. In stock form, skilled drivers could push these cars through the quarter mile in the low 13-second range at roughly 107 miles per hour. Optimized gearing, sticky slicks, and experienced drivers, some examples dipped into the high 12-second range, astonishing numbers for a factory street car in 1970. Suddenly, competitors had a new problem. How do you beat an engine that doesn't need to rev sky high to dominate? The Chrysler 426 Street Hemi officially produced 425 horsepower and around 490 pound-feet of torque. Ford answered with the 429 Super Cobra Jet, officially rated at 375 horsepower but widely believed to produce considerably more. Pontiac still offered its Ram Air 4. Oldsmobile had the mighty 455 W30. Buick unleashed the Stage 1 455. The horsepower war had become an arms race. Yet the LS6's combination of displacement, airflow, and relentless low-end torque made it one of the most intimidating engines on the street, and Chevrolet knew exactly how special it was. The LS6 package wasn't cheap. Ordering one added significant cost over a standard Chevelle SS, and buyers also needed the SS equipment package before they could even select the engine. By the time performance options, heavy-duty cooling, suspension upgrades, and transmissions were added, the final price climbed quickly, yet enthusiasts happily paid, because nothing else felt quite like it. Production reflected that exclusivity. Chevrolet built only a little over 400 Chevelle SS models equipped with the LS6 during the 1970 model year, making it one of the rarest and most desirable factory muscle cars of its era. But rarity wasn't what made it legendary. Fear did. Insurance companies had begun watching America's horsepower war with growing concern. Accident rates involving high-performance cars were climbing, and insurers understood something many buyers ignored. More power didn't automatically mean more control. Premiums for high-horsepower muscle cars skyrocketed. Young buyers who could barely afford the monthly payments suddenly faced insurance bills that sometimes rivaled their car payments. Dealers noticed customers walking away, not because they didn't want the car, but because they couldn't afford to insure it. Meanwhile, Washington was paying attention for different reasons. Stricter emissions regulations were approaching. Higher compression engines like the LS6 depended on premium high-octane lated gasoline. Cleaner burning, lower-octane fuels would soon become the future. Engineers who had spent years chasing maximum horsepower suddenly found themselves designing engines for lower emissions and better fuel economy instead. The golden age of unrestricted American horsepower was running out of time. But before that chapter closed, the LS6 had already cemented its reputation. Not because it won every race, not because it posted the biggest dyno numbers, but because it demanded respect every single time the key turned. And for anyone who underestimated it, the consequences could be unforgettable. Because the story of the LS6 wasn't ending, it was about to become a legend that collectors would chase for the next half-century. By the beginning of 1971, the mood inside Detroit had changed. Just a year earlier, engineers had been celebrating bigger carburetors, higher compression ratios, and ever larger displacement. Now executives were sitting in boardrooms asking a completely different question. How much longer can this last? The answer, not very long. The LS6 had proven exactly what Chevrolet engineers wanted it to prove. They had built one of the most powerful production engines America had ever seen, but they had also exposed the limits of the entire muscle car formula. More horsepower no longer guaranteed better performance. In many cases, it simply made cars harder to control. Most people don't realize the LS6 wasn't killed because it was a bad engine. It disappeared because the world around it changed. Federal emissions regulations were tightening. The Clean Air Act demanded cleaner exhaust emissions, forcing manufacturers to abandon the high compression formulas that had fueled the horsepower wars. And 11.25-to-1 compression ratio worked beautifully with high-octane leaded gasoline. It didn't work nearly as well with the lower-octane unleaded fuels that were rapidly becoming the future. Engineers faced an impossible compromise. Lower compression meant less power. Retarded ignition timing meant slower acceleration. Leaner fuel mixtures meant cleaner emissions, but hotter combustion temperatures and reduced performance. The very engineering choices that made the LS6 legendary had suddenly become liabilities. And then came another enemy: insurance companies. Throughout 1970 and 1971, insurers collected more and more accident data involving high-horsepower muscle cars. Their conclusions were impossible to ignore. Cars producing well over 400 horsepower were being driven by people with little experience controlling them. Many crashes weren't caused by mechanical failure. They were caused by overconfidence. Premiums for cars like the Chevelle SS 454 climbed dramatically. For some young buyers, annual insurance costs became nearly as painful as the monthly car payment itself. Dealers watched customers admire LS6-powered Chevelles in the showroom, only to walk away once they saw the insurance quote. And then, the real nightmare started. General Motors officially ended LS6 production after the 1970 model year. Chevrolet continued offering the 454, but the era of the fire-breathing, solid-lifter, high-compression LS6 was over. In 1971, compression ratios dropped significantly, and by 1972, the entire industry switched from gross horsepower ratings to the more realistic SAE net system. On paper, horsepower numbers collapsed almost overnight. Many buyers believed engines had suddenly become weak. In reality, the measuring system had changed, and emissions equipment was quietly stealing away the rest. The horsepower war was over, but the legend of the LS6 was only beginning. As the decades passed, enthusiasts began looking back at 1970 as the final peak of the original muscle car era. Among all those legendary engines, one stood above the rest, not because it had the highest advertised horsepower, not because it won every race, because of how it delivered its power. Modern performance cars often produce far more horsepower than the LS6 ever did. A family sedan today can outrun many classic muscle cars, but computers control throttle response. Stability control prevents slides. Traction control manages wheel spin hundreds of times every second. The LS6 had none of that. When you pressed the accelerator, your right foot was directly connected to 8 massive pistons moving through a 4.00-inch stroke inside a cast iron block weighing well over 200 pounds. Every combustion event traveled through forged rods into a forged crankshaft before twisting the drive shaft with as much as 500 pound-feet of torque. Nothing filtered the experience. Nothing protected you from your own mistakes. That raw mechanical honesty is exactly why enthusiasts still love it. Collectors certainly do. Today, an authentic 1970 Chevelle SS 454, equipped with the original LS6 engine, is among the most valuable American muscle cars ever produced. Matching numbers examples restored to factory specifications routinely sell for well into 6 figures, while exceptional, documented cars have crossed auction blocks for several $100,000, not because they're the fastest, because they're irreplaceable. Only a little over 4,400 LS6-powered Chevelles were built, and every year that passes makes untouched survivors even rarer. Engine builders still study the LS6 today. The Mark IV big block architecture became the foundation for countless high-performance Chevrolet engines. Racers pushed the platform well beyond 600, 700, and eventually more than 1,000 horsepower with modern cylinder heads, stronger rotating assemblies, and advanced fuel systems. The original engineering proved just how much potential had been hiding inside that block all along. Even Chevrolet itself couldn't escape the engine's legacy. Decades later, when GM revived the legendary LS name for its new generation of small block V8s beginning in the late 1990s, an entirely new family of engines was born. Despite sharing the famous LS designation, those modern engines have no direct engineering relationship to the 1970 LS6 big block. Yet the old name carried so much respect among enthusiasts that it became part of Chevrolet performance history once again. That's how powerful the legend became. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the LS6 isn't measured in auction prices or dyno sheets, it's measured in respect. Ask anyone who owned one back in 1970, and you'll hear remarkably similar stories. They'll talk about the sound first, that unmistakable deep, uneven idle from the solid lifter camshaft. Then they'll smile while describing the moment the Holley carburetor opened completely and the car lunged forward as if it had broken free from gravity. And almost every one of them will tell you the same thing. You never stopped respecting it, because the moment you became careless, the car reminded you who was really in charge. That's the hidden truth behind the LS6. It wasn't created by an engineer trying to build the deadliest muscle car engine in history. It was created by engineers obsessed with winning the horsepower war. They made one bold engineering decision: put nearly race car levels of performance into a production street car. The result wasn't just incredible speed. It was an engine that exposed the limits of 1970s tires, suspensions, brakes, and sometimes even the people behind the wheel. And that's exactly why its reputation has survived for more than half a century. The LS6 didn't become legendary because it was perfect. It became legendary because it was unapologetic. 450 advertised horsepower, 500 pound-feet of torque, 11.25 to 1 compression, a forged rotating assembly built to survive punishment, a machine designed to dominate an era when engineers believed there was no substitute for cubic inches. In many ways, they were right, because even today, more than 50 years later, people still speak its name with equal parts admiration and caution.